Imagine you are in a vehicle driving 100 miles an hour toward a cliff. The passengers are holding a democratic vote on what radio station to listen to.
Well, hold on.
And the driver's actively celebrating how fast the speedometer is climbing. That is not a metaphor. That is the exact mathematical reality of our current global economy. Human society is currently running on a defective operating system.
Defective? You can't just...
We are trapped in a state of terminal stagnation. It is a bug that we mistake for stability. This entire structure is built on a fatal mathematical illusion, which is the belief that capitalism is an infinitely supplied gasoline.
Okay, wait, I have to stop you right there. What you are coldly calling a defective operating system is the very foundation of human agency, its progress, its freedom.
We are accelerating an obsolete engine based on ownership and accumulation, a model mathematically doomed by the finite parameters of our physical planet. The only viable patch for this failing hardware is the immediate implementation of the physical protocols of circular capitalism.
But democratic capitalism is not some algorithmic bug that needs to be overwritten. It is the most resilient, adaptable framework human beings have ever created. It allows massive, diverse societies to navigate competing ideologies, right, to establish the rules of the room through consensus, and to assign value based on actual human need.
Your defense of this so-called agency relies on a fundamentally manufactured premise. Modern democracy is not a system of free will. It is the world's most sophisticated responsibility laundering system.
Responsibility laundering? That's incredibly cynical.
It is specifically engineered so that when the systemic crash inevitably occurs, no one has to take responsibility. A politician operates on a 4-year cycle, pushing the thermodynamic debt to the next administration, while the public demands immediate gratification.
They demand a functioning society, they don't just...
The public's voting behavior does not dictate the physical future. It consists of the electorate pressing the button just because. It is effectively an idle audition to decide which talent will tell you sweet lies.
That is an incredibly inaccurate reduction of the democratic process. Voters are not just blindly pressing buttons for whoever smiles the brightest. They are participating in a collective negotiation of our future based on real economic realities.
It is a propaganda game funded by the extraction of finite physical resources, masquerading as political choice.
No, look, elections allow societies to course correct. When a policy fails, the electorate responds. We debate the rules of the room, whether we need tighter environmental regulations, whether we need carbon taxes, or if we need freer markets to spur technological breakthroughs. That friction, that ability to reflect the collective will and change direction, is the mechanism that has continually saved us from collapse.
The mechanism you champion is a placebo designed to mask the symptoms of a terminal disease.
Advanced economies are already seeing a decoupling of GDP growth from carbon emissions. We use price signals in a free market to...
You are placing a waiting room of medically ignorant patients in charge of deciding a complex surgical procedure via a majority vote. The result is mathematically predictable. They will inevitably vote for the doctor who prescribes painless, sweet medicine, while the actual patient, quietly dies of the underlying disease.
But the price signals naturally incentivize the transition to alternative materials. When scarcity arises, that is a system successfully debugging itself.
You speak of decoupling GDP and carbon, ignoring the thermodynamic reality that those emissions are simply exported to developing nations. You are defending a paradigm where society is choosing a driver based on the beauty of the speedometer when the fuel gauge points to zero.
The fuel gauge is not pointing to zero.
The speedometer's aesthetics, your beloved GDP growth, are completely irrelevant when the physical combustion of the engine ceases. That is the illusion of democratic choice.
I think, honestly, anyone listening to you right now is absolutely terrified. You are suggesting we strip away democratic voting because you believe people are too what? Ignorant to manage their own resources? You are completely dismissing the intelligence of the public and the efficiency of market mechanics.
I am looking at the physical mathematics of a closed system.
When oil becomes scarce, it becomes expensive. That price signal naturally drives capital into solar, into wind, into nuclear energy. We innovate. We don't just ask for sweet medicine. I mean, historically, societies have made profound sacrifices when the reality of a situation demands it.
If your alternative is so mathematically perfect, what exactly are you proposing that doesn't completely strip away our freedom to choose how we allocate our own labor?
I am proposing the immediate implementation of the physical protocols of circular capitalism. Your current democratic system operates like a department store where customers decide the manager, despite having absolutely zero understanding of the supply chain, the inventory, or the structural integrity of the building.
But they understand their own needs. The customers vote to keep the prices low. The manager complies by selling off the store's load-bearing pillars to subsidize the discount. And you call this collective negotiation?
That is...
In circular capitalism, the economy is physically pegged to the Earth's regenerative rate, not a central bank's printer. You cannot issue credit for a new project unless the exact thermodynamic energy and material tonnage required has been physically recycled and mathematically accounted for in the planetary ledger.
A planetary ledger? You were talking about a command economy, more absolute and suffocating than anything attempted in the 20th century.
It eliminates the fatal bug of humans consuming resources that do not yet exist.
A ledger that dictates exactly what can and cannot be built based on a strict calorie count of the Earth requires an authoritarian surveillance state. You'd have to track every gram of material. Furthermore, the central banks you are so quick to dismiss are exactly what fund the innovation to solve these environmental constraints. You look at global finance and see a doomed machine. But we have institutions, we have macroeconomic tools, checks and balances to prevent the exact kind of runaway collapse you are predicting.
Your checks and balances are executing the exact same fatal sequence as the most notorious monetary collapses in human history. The central banks you rely on are merely speed-running the destruction of purchasing power to hide physical depletion. They are executing the Zimbabwe Protocol.
The Zimbabwe Protocol? That is absurd.
Comparing modern quantitative easing to Zimbabwe's hyperinflation under Robert Mugabe is just intellectually dishonest. It is the exact same mechanical sequence.
If you are going to point to systemic economic failures, you have to acknowledge context. Zimbabwe was a localized anomaly. That was the madness of a dictator who seized agricultural land, destroyed his own country's physical output, and then printed trillion-dollar notes to pay off his military to prevent a coup. It was a failure of institutions, a failure of the rule of law. It was not a flaw of global capitalism, it was the total absence of it.
Zimbabwe was not an anomaly.
Quantitative easing is a highly calibrated macroeconomic tool used by advanced nations to stabilize liquidity.
In video game terminology, there's a concept called an RTA, a real-time attack, or a speed run, where a player attempts to reach the end of the game as fast as possible. Zimbabwe simply executed a bad-ending RTA.
A speed run? We are talking about global economics, not a video game.
They completed the exact same route to systemic collapse, faster than anyone else. Advanced nations are executing the exact protocol today, just at a slower, highly managed pace via your calibrated quantitative easing.
There is a fundamental structural difference between managing a complex modern money supply backed by massive technological output, intellectual property, global trade networks, and the raw, unhinged printing of fiat currency to cover up a dictator's destruction of physical farms.
The physical mechanics are completely identical. The only difference is the thickness of the institutional makeup.
In the 2008 financial crisis, and again during the 2020 pandemic, central banks bought government bonds and lowered interest rates to ensure that credit flowed to businesses so they could keep producing real goods and services. Without that intervention, you get a deflationary death spiral, mass unemployment. It is a slow, controlled process governed by highly educated economists aiming for a stable 2% inflation target, not an uncontrollable spiral.
Imagine printing money on a village copier. At first, you distribute the paper and everyone rejoices. They say, "Ah, a democratic leader."
We are not a village with a copier.
They hold a piece of paper that says they are wealthy. They feel secure.
But the next day, they take that paper to the baker, and there is no bread, because a printed ticket cannot miraculously create physical grain. Currency is merely a tracking ticket for physical resources. When you print tickets without expanding the physical resource base, which is physically impossible indefinitely on a finite planet, you trigger a self-cannibalizing system.
But the central banks inject liquidity precisely so the bakeries can stay open, so the supply chains can be repaired, so farmers can get loans for next year's seeds.
Your 2% inflation target is merely the system systematically stealing 2% of the working class's stored physical labor every single year to avoid an immediate freeze of the elite's assets.
You are stripping away every single ounce of human intent and morality from the people managing these systems. Leaders, even flawed, self-interested ones, possess a fundamental sense of public duty. You look at government expenditures, its stimulus packages, and you see mathematical fraud. But those leaders are worrying about actual societal infrastructure. They're funding military pay, the salaries of teachers, public servants, the maintenance of the electrical grid, the stability of the entire nation.
That supposed public duty is nothing more than an evolutionary survival tactic of the elite.
Empathy is a survival tactic. If they do not maintain that stability, the whole system fractures. It is not a malicious act. It is a desperate, concerted attempt to keep the ship afloat for everyone on board.
Their two-facedness is highly evolved marketing copy designed specifically to suppress revolt. Because the leaders orchestrating this face no immediate physical feedback for their waste, the lack of constraints is turning them into irresponsible monsters. They exist completely outside the consequences of the resource depletion they command.
It is not a mathematical certainty that every single leader is acting out of cynical self-preservation.
When a leader talks about paying public servants or maintaining national stability while simultaneously eroding the physical resource base through debt, it is functionally identical to a shopkeeper on the verge of bankruptcy taking the last cash from the register and saying, "This is for the store's future."
But they are investing in the...
It is the ultimate prioritization of the inner circle to delay the leader's own physical demise. They are systematically dismantling parts of a sinking ship to luxuriously remodel only their own rooms, while selling the passengers the illusion of buoyancy.
What you cynically label as marketing copy is the actual fabric of human civilization. It is empathy. It is the social contract. Yes, our economic system has complexities and severe flaws, but if we adopt your cold, mechanistic worldview, we lose the very empathy and social cohesion that allows us to care for the vulnerable in the first place.
The current system accounts for human psychology only by exploiting it to accelerate consumption. The human spirit you defend is a luxury subsidized by cheap energy.
We need the current democratic capitalist system because it is the only framework that actively accounts for human ambition, psychology, and compassion.
You cannot optimize a society solely for thermodynamic efficiency without crushing the human spirit.
In circular capitalism, there must be synchronized physical pain.
Physical pain.
If the society runs a resource deficit, the leader's physical rations must be cut immediately. Without this feedback loop, without immediate physical synchronization of survival costs, the ultimate result is mathematically inescapable. When the finite resources finally run out and the digital tracking tickets lose all connection to physical reality, the software will not just crash.
You are ignoring our ability to adapt. It will trigger the worst reboot, destroying the hardware itself, global war, resource conflicts, total physical collapse of the biosphere. When the software cannot reconcile its debt to physics, it destroys the server.
This bleak, apocalyptic worldview completely discounts human ingenuity. We are not just lines of code executing a pre-programmed crash sequence. We have ideals, we have democratic hope, we have the proven ability to invent our way out of scarcity.
Ideals do not generate calories.
Look at the Green Revolution that fed billions of people when experts predicted mass starvation. Look at the Haber-Bosch process, where human minds literally figured out how to pull agricultural fertilizer out of the thin air. We are not bound by your static thermodynamic limits because human intellect creates new resources out of previously useless matter.
We are merely living in the orchestra's playing time after the Titanic hit the iceberg.
No, we are steering the ship. Yes, the ecological challenges are immense, and the transition away from fossil fuels is difficult, but our ideals must count for something against this cold reductionism.
The Haber-Bosch process you revere runs entirely on the combustion of finite natural gas.
You are telling people that their choices, their votes, their profound hopes for a better future are just data noise. If we abandon our democratic capitalist framework for your rigid circular capitalism, where every single human action is dictated by a strict survival algorithm, we strip away the very essence of our humanity. We become prisoners of a survival metric. We must defend human agency.
Physics does not care about your hope. Physics does not respond to good intentions, and it certainly does not bend to democratic consensus. The music you are so desperately defending is only serving to drown out the sound of the water rushing into the lower decks. Human bellies swell with physical resources, not with credit, not with ideals, and not with printed tracking tickets. Therefore, stripping away the fatal bug of human emotion and transitioning to circular capitalism, a system strictly governed by the physical feedback of resource circulation and the immediate synchronization of survival costs, is not a political choice to be debated. It is the single, chillingly rational investment required for survival.